So we're going to use Maya to create a very basic scene and do very, very low poly layout. So boxes, cubes. If anything, we'll use like a handful of edits on a particular object to give it some kind of shape so that we know a chair is a chair, right? Table is a table. The main thing I want to do is kind of have a focal point. We want to use a camera angle, a camera lens, not just use the default camera lens. And there's a tool that I like called the Golden Crop. And we can also look at image compositions, okay? There's a variety of them out there, okay? So these are kind of the standards. These like triangle, golden spiral, spiral section, rule of thirds, golden rule of thirds. And there's far more beyond that. We can decide or create a whole bunch if we want, right? Things that are based on perspective, okay? There's a good video that we're going to watch in a moment. Right, so you have a whole sort of series of shots and styles, right? You can have kind of like silhouetted framing. This is very like center triangle, center framing. You can have more than just those kind of golden rule of thirds, right? Something that's more geometric with a vanishing point, right? There's a variety of spirals. I'm going to show you a tool that I like to use. It's a compositional tool in Photoshop, actually. So it's something called the Golden Crop. And if you Google it, Golden Crop Photoshop, it's usually a link here to SourceForge is sort of where you can find it. So you download it. I've already downloaded mine. I'm going to go to my download folder and show you how I run this. So it's in a zip file. I basically will just unzip the file, and there's a basic script. So what you want to do is kind of determine what frame size you're working in. For us, it's typically 1920 by 1080, so I'm going to launch Photoshop. Okay, so if you go to File, New, or hit Control-N, usually I'll switch to Film and Video. There's 1920 by 1080 is default. There are a few other varieties in here, sort of like different widescreen formats, cinema formats like Cinon, and you can look these up. We can talk about them at greater length another time. So here's the kind of full image, right? And I want to create framing for this. So here's how I use the script. I'll go to File, Import, File, Scripts, Browse, and then I'll paste my location for that script and double click the script. It's going to pop this up. I usually like to select all, and I usually like to make the line thickness a little bit thicker, like 7 or 8 percentage points larger. I'll hit OK. It's going to basically run through and give me, right, these different kind of compositional guides. So it's a bit odd, but if you kind of click off or hit escape, it will essentially drop these into the canvas. And I'll now just, let's turn these off. So you can pick, again, they're really great. So these are golden spiral. The golden spiral is sort of like, or golden ratio, right, is this kind of mathematical equation that some people determines a lot within our reality, right? It sort of mimics the shape and spiral of seashells, the growth formation of lots of plants, like sunflowers, hurricanes, right? Different spiral galaxies. It can be used in, it's a proportional relationship. I forget what the ratio is. It's something like 60-40-ish. 1.168 is kind of this ratio, okay? So you could create a cube that's spaced that way. So this gives you sort of different directional spirals, right? And what you'd want to do is kind of place potentially focal points in those areas and maybe have points of interest along the way that leads the eye. Again, it's not the only way to create composition. You can decide to use something beyond these, but I like this as a guideline. I believe this is the one I use for my shot, so I'll show you how I work with this. Once you picked one that you like, and by the way, I'll just maybe show this last one. So this kind of center, right, triangular composition, diamond composition. This is the regular rule of thirds, where you have an equal division of both the horizontal and vertical frame, right? So equally spaced. This is based on that ratio of 1.16, where it's almost like 60% here, 40% here, right? And then going the opposite way, 60% from left to right here, 40%. And so you see it's a little different than just equally dividing. And the eye definitely seems to like these proportions and points of interest. Yeah. These are basically vector lines, meaning they're like mathematically derived lines with points, and they can be kind of altered and stuff. So what I usually wind up doing is once I pick the one I like, I'm just going to basically go to flatten. And what this will do is, yes, I'll discard any hidden layers. This will kind of turn it into like a pixel-based line art. And if you're in layers, okay, oops, right, so there's layers, then there's channels. What I usually will do is I'll take the layer. I should show you this too, by the way. Before getting into channels, I'm going to take this and basically make it black and white. So I'll go to Image, Adjustments, Desaturate. Oh, there we go. And the shortcut for that is Shift-Control-U. Whenever I see shortcuts in a software, if I'm using it a lot, I'll try to just remember the shortcut instead of having to go to the menu. It saves a lot of time. And if you can do that, like take your top 10 most used tools and find a shortcut or make one for it, it is a huge time saver. Okay, so I'll desaturate and I'll go back to Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast. And for the contrast, I'll crank it up. I usually like to use Legacy mode because it really gives me like high contrast right away. It's less mathematically accurate, let's say, but the Legacy mode just gets you there much faster. The other thing I want to do is basically flip this around. So to flip the colors or invert them, you hit Control-I, okay? So that flips these colors. So what I want to do is basically take this image and make it a mask or an alpha, a transparency inside of Maya that I'm going to load into my camera. That way I can the black areas will be invisible, right? The way I think of alphas, transparencies, or masks is that the black area is a hole, black hole, right? Simple way to think of it. So I'll hit Control-A to select everything, Control-C to copy, and then I'll go to Channels, and you can just pick any of the red, green, or blue and say Duplicate Channel, and you're going to call this Alpha, okay? So I'll hop into the alpha, make sure I've selected the alpha. I believe that's in there just as is, and that's fine. Next, I'm going to hit Alt-Control-S, or you can go to File, Save as a Copy, right? Alt-Control-S, see? And I'll just save this for now. I will set up a project, but for now I'm going to put this just in my downloads. And I'm going to save this as, oops. Try that again. Save this as a Targa, T-A-R-G-A. And I'll just call this cam_mask. One of the reasons I don't put spaces, by the way, in most names is that when you have files and sometimes other files that are referencing things inside of Maya files, spaces can be replaced with random characters, oftentimes like a percentage sign, and then it can screw up a lot of files. So I do highly recommend starting to adopt this practice of using underscores instead of spaces when naming stuff, okay? All right, so I'll save that out. Next up, I'll load up Maya. So we're in Maya. What I recommend doing, as I mentioned earlier, Maya handles things that are human scale and up. So I often recommend, like, if you're working on the scale of insects or even like bacteria, make the bacteria at least like 30 centimeters, which is a foot, 30 centimeters or bigger, okay? Anything below that, it can be harder to light because the lighting systems in most 3D software is based in a large way on physical reality, and it's hard to light things at a super small scale, right? So there's a lot of mathematics behind that. So I recommend if you're having a scene, most of you are going to have a human scale scene. What I recommend you do is you go to Windows, Content Browser, and that will pop up the content browser. And you can load in, I don't know the exact height of the female. There's a male character or a human body, male, female, whatever. Okay, I'll load in just this generic. Okay, and this thing is 180 centimeters, 6 feet. Okay. You could do the same thing, by the way, with a cube. So if you go to a cube and go into the inputs, which is over on the right-hand side here, right? Set the height to 180. Oops, number lock is off. Width, I'll set to some, excuse me, something like 30 or 50, let's say. Height 180. All right. And then if you were to sort of position that upwards, oops. Right, that's basically it. One other tool I'd like to show you is how to measure things, which is incredibly useful. You can go to Create, Measure Tools, Distance. Okay. Click on that. The way I use this oftentimes is I'll hold V. So what V is a snap to vertex. So if I left click and drag, I'll hold V. Oops, let me just make sure I'm in that mode. Distance tool. It's acting a bit odd. Anyways, I'll put one there and then holding V. Well, yeah, that's weird. I don't know why it's doing it. But yeah, if you left click and drag. Yeah, see, this is shooting off in space. I'm not sure why my snapping isn't working, but let's try that one more time. Create distance. Yeah, it's kind of misbehaving, so I'm going to use another snapping option. I'll go to the front view. Okay, I'll hold X. X will snap to the grid here, okay? So X is snapping to the grid. So hold X, click kind of at the bottom of the foot, top of the head, right? What do you get? About 180, right? It's approximate because I'm not maybe snapping to the exact points, but you get the idea. So this is a good way to ensure you're in scale. It's one of the first things I do, and I think you should do in most scenes, or pretty much all your scenes, is make sure you're building in the appropriate scale. Now, like I said, if you're building something super small, you're building grains of sand that are the size of boulders, then build those grains of sand like I said, a foot or 5 feet, 10 feet in diameter, not on their actual scale, because it's really hard to work when you're dealing with something really, really tiny. Same thing when you start. Let's say if you're building like Godzilla, that's the size of a building, you might want to build at human scale first, and then before you start rigging and skinning, you scale it up so it's appropriate for the shots, or maybe it stays in a kind of like modified scale where it's like 20 feet tall instead of 200 feet tall. So there's kind of an ideal Goldilocks range for characters, I would say. Nothing smaller than a foot, I recommend, okay? Now, once we got that done, I'm going to actually, when it comes to walls and floors and things like that, just simple planes are totally fine. So here we go. We'll create a plane here. If you go to the plane, I usually make it really, really simple, like 1 or 2 divisions is all you really need. By the way, if you hold shift and then left click and drag, you can make a copy very quickly. So that's how I would make my walls, okay? For rotation, by the way, it's imprecise, and unfortunately, we don't always have like the. I find it a pain to go constantly over to the rotation boxes. So what I usually will do is I will double click on the rotation tool icon on the left side, double click it, turn on snap, and say relative, and it's going to snap in 15-degree chunks. So very easily I know, okay, I'm at 90 degrees now. Great. By the way, if I hold shift and rotate, I can do the same thing. Get a clone, rotate it 90 degrees the other way, and slide that over, okay? So a lot of times when we're looking at a space or developing an environment, you'll be looking at 1, maybe 2 walls, maybe 3, right? You can have almost a dead-on view like that, right? A lot of times things are framed like this. And if you look at most films, right? Just do a quick Google here. Can't spell today. Right, if you're taking a look, right, that's kind of what you're seeing, right? Is almost like a corner. Maybe, like I said, maybe something flat like this and 2 walls, the ceiling and the floor, right? It's never like the full room, or very rarely. And if there is more of a full room, chances are you're not going to see it right, beyond this area. Sometimes there's not even a ceiling, mainly because of the lighting, right? So those, we want to build only what we need to see. Okay. Now, another trick that I like to use, because, you know, sometimes we're panning around, spinning around. We don't want to have our main set be obscured. So one thing you can do, and to mention this, flat polygons like this that are not enclosed, they have a single side that is renderable, which is this gray side. When you turn around and you see the blackness there, that is technically like an invisible side. So light can go through that mesh on the back side to the front. On the front side, light would hit it and bounce off, okay? Even on like enclosed, fully enclosed objects like a cube, a sphere, they have the same thing. There's polygons that point, that tell the software, hey, this is the outside versus the inside, which is not really renderable. Unless you apply a specific material that says, hey, both sides of this are renderable, right? So if you want to make like a leaf, you could just put a texture on it and then say, make it render both sides. But in this case, there's a great trick that I love to use, which is under shading, there's something called backface culling. And what it will do is say, hey, since we're not really using the backside of those polys, make it invisible. Right? So now when you're kind of panning around, you see, you don't have to have the walls and the floor obscuring your POV. And one last thing I like to do organizationally sometimes is to select these kind of things that are going to stay there and be in place. I will add them to a new layer. So that's over on the right-hand side here, layers, and you click on the far right icon, which is a little blue dot with a white background. It basically adds those to what's called a layer, and then you can either hide them and unhide them. I forget what the middle box is for, but the right box, right now it's like fully selectable and editable, okay? If you click on it once, it becomes transparent, so you can kind of see it as a reference point. You click it a third time, it is in reference mode, meaning you can see it, but you can't accidentally move it, right? So very, very useful to kind of have that organization built in. Something else I also strongly recommend is that you start to label these things. So we'll call this, usually I go by categories, so set, okay, floor. And again, I do underscores, no spaces, wall underscore R for, sorry, that should be L for left. Wall underscore R, okay? Oh, and I did make a mistake too on this when importing. I want to show you something that happens. When you import anything, if you're bringing in a mesh, there's something called namespaces, and what it's trying to do is sort of create a container that references the original file's file name. That can get really messy really fast. So if we go to, where is it? Edit. Maybe it's under window. Yeah, under Windows, General Editor, okay? Windows, General Editor, Namespace Editor. You see right here, this is the human body file that brought it in. I would just say delete this, and it'll say, do you want to merge with root? I'll merge it with the root, okay? So then it doesn't have this kind of weird container around it that says like human body, semicolon, human body, okay? By the way, if you are importing any other models, if you go to File, Import, I'm going to show you how to kind of work around that. If you go to the import options, right, again, I often when there's a little box next to an option in Maya, I'll often go into the box. So if you take a look here, under namespace options, you can just simply uncheck that. And if you want to have that be a default, hit save. That's usually what I do with my projects anyway, so, okay? Okay, so that's namespaces in a nutshell, layers in a nutshell, right? Next up, I want to start to think about my actual cinema camera. I'm going to select the perspective. I usually want to keep my 4 primary cameras kind of safe and secure. So what I'm going to do is go to View, Create Camera from View, which again, the shortcut is Control-Shift-C. And I'll call this cam_sin, like cinema, okay? Now, one of the first things I highly recommend you do is you take a look at the focal length. This is kind of like how wide the view is, okay? And let me just throw in like, I don't know, a cylinder for now. By the way, just to mention this too, right? I find when you're working on this scale, there's a couple of other weird issues, right? Like when I create the cylinder, it's super tiny, okay? If you go to create polygon primitives, and again, go to the little options box for cylinder, instead of it defaulting to 1, 1, 1, I might say, let's make it, yeah, the height will be 20, the radius will be, I don't know, 10. And again, I can hit edit, save, create. Now it's kind of more appropriately scaled for this scene, okay? I still may want to scale it up or whatever. Let's say it's kind of like a bench or something, a seat. So I just wanted another reference object to show you this. Yeah, let me make sure, am I looking through Perspective SynCam? Yes. If you go to the attributes for the camera, 35 is the default. I usually recommend changing that. So if we have a wider angle, that means a lower focal length. 18 is something like fisheye, and you see how distorted that gets, right? It's like extreme, right? And if you go the opposite direction, let's say like 150 millimeter lens, it's going to have a very narrow, right? It's going to flatten things out. And if you take a look, it almost looks like there's no perspective, right? A lot of films, one of the reasons why films shoot interiors on sets is that they actually compress the space and limit perspective. It also can give you other effects. So having different focal lengths is really important, and I think fairly interesting when it comes to selecting your shot. So if we take just a brief look at that, right? If you were to stand in the same position, right? This is a wide angle, meaning you appear further back and you're capturing much more of the space, versus having a higher focal length, which is a narrower width of frame. And it can change. It changes your perspective. So sometimes I find, for me, the wide angle lens, I love the look of it. I like the sense of perspective or heightened perspective. There is no exact correlation between human vision and camera lenses. A lot of people say 50 millimeter to 80 millimeter is kind of a range that's close to like the human field of view and the human sense of perspective. I like wider angle lenses. I think it's because I'm influenced by certain directors. But again, what is interesting about a wide angle lens is the subject feels smaller relative to the space. So if you want to make some character feel inferior or lost in a way, you can use that lens choice. If you want to make the space feel more intimate and close or condensed and claustrophobic, use a zoom lens like a 200 mil, 100 mil lens, okay? So you want to think about those choices, right? And see, what is the impact? There's a psychological impact on that, right? And even just the perception of a face can change, right? So again, if you go to very low focal lengths, you get into something like fisheye. When you get to like 18 mils and below, right? And you've seen shots like this. So you see the complete distortion and complete exaggeration of perspective, right? So my preference for my own shots is typically wide, but you might want to go with something like 80 mil is pretty standard, 80 to 100 mil, right? And that's fine. Next up, you want to go into the render settings of Maya, which is the little clapper icon with a small blue gear on it. I think by default it's already in HD, so I'll just make sure it's HD 1080 in the preset. When you're looking through the camera view, you want to look through what's called the resolution gate, okay? And it will create this kind of masking effect, which again, I find a bit distracting. So while I'm in the camera, I will tend to go into the display options over here in the attribute editor. Set the gate mask to 1. So, sorry, not to 1. The overscan, sorry, to 1. Okay? So that way you get the full width of the frame, especially if you're doing preview renders and things like that. You won't get this like kind of ghosted box around the image. You're going to maximize it to your viewport and to your renders. Okay? Now next, as kind of the final step of this initial setup for the camera and the composition, I'm going to, with the camera selected, go to the menu of the viewport and go to View, Image Plane, Import Image. Now, actually, before I do this, I want to bring up a very important point. This thing is just kind of defaulting to this sort of default project here, like C users administrator. So now is a good time to actually go and say, okay, file, let's set up a project. Set project. I'm going to click on the D drive. I'll put it in my just root folder for now. I'm going to right click, say new folder, and call it Cinema Setup. Okay. So you want to double click that and say set your folder. And I'll copy this as well just so I can quickly access it in a minute. It may ask you by default, do you want to select another location or create a default workspace? Just click on create default workspace. It's fine. And if I now paste this in my Windows, right, here's a default workspace, but there's nothing else set up here. So to finish this, you want to go to File, Project Window. And what this does is it gives you like a very great default folder and organizational structure. So again, it's pointing to the right location, to the right folder, right? You see Cinema Setup is the current project. This is the location. These are the subfolders that will be made. So I'll hit accept. Okay. So if I go back here again, bam, now all the folders are there, right? So I highly recommend doing this. And when you are working and switching between projects, you just have to go to set project and then you pick another folder and say, okay, well now I'm on this folder, okay? And you go to set and all the files and all that will be there. It's very, very easy. It makes your life a lot easier. And remember before I said I should put that file, the mask here, in the right location. So if I go back into here, all your textures go into source images, right? So now when I go into View, Image Plane, Import Image. Oops, did it not set? Let's go back to Set Project. Yes, there we go. Set. So yes, let me go back to View, Image Plane, Import Image. There, it's right there. My texture's right there, okay? Load that up. There's your compositional framing. Pretty nice. And by the way, if you wanted that to be maybe like a little more faded, sometimes what I'll do is, let me just get out of this for a second. I'll turn off the alpha so it's easier to read. If you go to Image, Adjustment, oops, Control D. Let me just make sure I'm on the RGB or the color editing. Image, Adjustments, Brightness, Contrast, and maybe just drop the brightness. Again, I'll use Legacy because it's fast, right? I'll make it kind of faint white. Again, I'll select all this, Control A, Control C, copy, go to alpha, paste it in. Make sure all channels are visible, Alt Control S. Go back to Targa. And yes, let's go back to the right drive. There we go. Save that. Pop back over to Maya. I think I'll just have to relink it. And there you see it's a little bit more faint, so I'm not as maybe distracted by it visually, okay?